Hello everyone, welcome back. So today we're going to be talking about AR-9s. We're going to be talking about some of the differences between your AR-9 and your mil-spec AR-15s. So even though this looks like an AR-15, it's not. First of all, it shoots 9mm, and there's no mil-spec AR-9. So different companies have their own patterns. Okay, so you cannot mix and match the uppers and lowers from different companies that sell AR-9s. Now, sometimes you might find two companies that are using the same pattern, and that's going to work. But as a general rule, assume that whatever you buy from one company is not going to work on the other company. Okay, so I like working with these Palmettos. They've done great for me. These are excellent training guns. Training people on 9mm is a lot cheaper than training them on 5.56. And what I will usually do is I'll do like 90% of the rifle training on an AR-9, and then for that last 10%, I'll use an actual AR-15. Now, the magazines, right, like this one over here, takes Glock mags, okay, which is a great convenience for me. Now, and what I was saying is that different companies will make AR-9s that work with different magazines, right? So some have proprietary, some might have, I don't know, maybe Beretta mags or something. But I like AR-9s that use Glock magazines, and the reason is because the pistols that I generally train people on are Glocks, Glock 17, Glock 19. The reason why I use Glocks, okay, is because my 3 criteria for a gun is that it's gotta be reliable, I gotta have access to parts when the gun breaks, and I have to have knowledge to fix the guns when it breaks. So prior to 2020, I was training people on a whole bunch of different guns, and then what happened is I just got so busy in 2020, right? Training people, right? I was sometimes going through 4,000 rounds a month, okay? The guns started breaking, okay? And the only guns that I could get, like reliably get replacement parts for, were AR-15s and Glocks, okay? Now you couldn't get them from Glock, the company itself. Like, you couldn't get factory Glock parts, but I could get aftermarket parts that worked reasonably well, okay? So after 2020, it's like, which is, I think the same thing would apply for an SHTF type of situation. I stick with AR-15s and Glocks. The AR-9s are good as a way to train on your AR-15s because basically all the buttons, all the switches are pretty much the same, right? You got your charging handle here, you got your magazine release there, you got your safety lever there, okay? So it mostly works the same. The only thing that's different is that it doesn't usually, all right, they don't lock open on the last round, okay? So if you look on an AR-15 mag, okay, the place that activates the last round bolt hold open is in the back, okay? Right. So if you look at a Glock mag, the place where the last round, either slide, hold open, is activated from the front. Okay. So because they're in a different position, okay, if you're going to have an AR-9 that has a last round bolt hold open, right, you either have to change the magazines, right, to, so that it lines up where the button is for the bolt catch, right. So you've got to change the magazine, or you've got to create some type of system of levers to, to activate it, right, and bring that back to where the button is, right, or move the button, right. So the idea here is that we don't want to change the design of the gun. We want to be able to train on this, and you want this gun to be like 90% like an AR-15. So we don't want to change the gun, right, or we want to stay as much as we can with the same gun design. So the easiest, we don't want to make the gun too expensive. Some companies will do that. Some companies will give you a last round bolt hold open, right? Either by changing the magazines or by putting a whole bunch of levers. So that tends to add to the cost of the gun. So what I have found as a practical, thing is that it's just easy. It's just cheaper, easier, more practical for me to accept that the gun is not going to open, is not going to lock open on the last round. So training wise, what that means is, like, if somebody's shooting, right, they pull the trigger, right? They don't have an indication that that was their last round because it didn't lock open. So the gun's gonna go click. What they gotta do now is they gotta take out the magazine, open up the bolt to look in the chamber to make sure they didn't have a jam, right? Put the next magazine in, okay, and now chamber around. So they basically got to run the slide or the charging handle twice, right? You got to run the charging handle twice, once to check it, the chamber, and once to chamber the next round, okay? So for me, I found that it's just a lot more practical to accept that, okay, rather than go to a much more expensive gun. I did work with one gun. It was from Stag Arms that had a last round bolt hold open built into the gun, and that feature broke on the first day. Okay, so I'm like, okay, this sucks, and the reason is because it's just a complicated mechanism. Okay, now like I said, sometimes companies will have different magazines. They'll either create their own magazines or so that they can get that last round bolt hold open. The reason why I like Glock mags is because I generally train people on Glocks 17s or 19s, and the reason is because they're easy for me to fix. Okay, so back in 2020, I got really busy and I was doing something like 4,000 rounds a month. Okay, sometimes more, and all the guns started breaking. Okay, so the ones that I could get that I could get parts for and I could reliably fix on my own were essentially Glocks and AR-15s. Okay, so 2020 was a lesson for me to only rely on guns that I have access to aftermarket parts and I have the knowledge to fix. Okay, so that's AR-15s and Glocks. Okay, so that's how I ended up here. I got plenty of other good guns, right? I got Berettas, I got Sigs, I got Smith & Wesson, right? But I couldn't get the aftermarket parts. So when the guns went down, they were down. Okay, so going back to the AR-9 here. Okay, so like I said, this looks like an AR-15, and some parts might be compatible, right? Like the brace or the stock back here. This is generally compatible. Some parts, like the trigger group here, right? It will fit a mil-spec trigger group. However, they don't all work really good with the AR-9, and the reason is because there's no locking mechanism to slow the bolt down. Okay, and what happens is with some trigger groups, because remember, when the bolt comes back, that resets the hammer. Okay, and it generally comes back really fast, faster than an AR-15, and sometimes because it's coming back so fast and so hard, it doesn't reset the hammer. Okay, so Palmetto recommends that you use the trigger groups that they sell specifically compatible with their AR-9s. Okay, and I have tried other trigger groups in my AR-9s, and they'll work like 95% of the time. The ones that they sell that they say, hey, these are going to work with the AR-9, their Palmetto AR-9, they work good. So I generally buy their trigger groups that they recommend for the AR-9s. I bought a few extra of them. I got them, in stock, so that if I ever run into another 2020 where it's hard to get parts, I got the extra parts. Okay, so trigger group, yeah, it's mil-spec, but not all mil-spec trigger groups are going to work great in your AR-9. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the bolt here. So let me take this apart. So like I said earlier, even though this comes apart like an AR-15, looks like an AR-15, it's not an AR-15. Okay, so show you guys. All right, so first of all, you see this funky little thing here, right? That's to stop the magazine, right? So when the magazine comes up, that's what stops it. Okay, so you can see here how the bolt catch is way back here, right? But the magazine, where on the Glock magazine, it's way up in the front. And even if it was in the back, it would be like back here somewhere. So you've got this distance from here to here where the bolt catch is. So you would have to create some type of a lever mechanism, right, to activate the bolt catch, which is way back here, right? Because you've got this space over here. So this space over here is normally on an AR-15 is occupied by the magazine, right? And you can see how the magazine basically lines up with the bolt catch, which is right there. Okay, so that's why the bolt catch is an issue, and you either got to change the magazine or you got to create some kind of a complicated lever system. Okay, let me get the magazine out. So on the buffer weight that's in the back, okay, I think they ship with 4 ounce or 5 ounce buffer weights. Get the 8 ounce ones. Let me open this up. So remember, there's no. I'm gonna show you guys the bolt in a minute, but there's no locking mechanism. So the only thing that slows down that bolt is this heavy 8 ounce buffer weight. Okay. So that's what you need to slow it down. Close this. Okay. So before I switched over all my AR-9s to 8 ounce buffer weights, I had issues with the hammer pin, right? That pin that goes right there, that would break, right? The bolt would just slam back and it would just like hit the hammer so hard, and then it would send a whatever. Basically, it would end up breaking the hammer pin. Okay, so I was going through hammer pins really fast. I talked to Palmetto, and they advised getting a heavier buffer weight. And once I put the heavier buffer weight in there, it eliminated that problem of breaking the hammer pins, and it also eliminated the problem that I had a couple of times of out of battery discharges. Okay, we'll talk about that in a second. So first, let's talk about the bolt. Okay, so if you look at this, I mean, the upper kind of looks like an AR-15, right? With the exception that there's no forward assist. But if we pull out, and by the way, the charging handle is a mil spec AR-15, so that's the same, that fits. But if we look at here's the thing, on an AR-15, right over here, what we have is a bolt carrier and the bolt, right? That's the bolt over here, right? Well, here there's no bolt carrier. There's just a bolt. Okay, so there's no rotation, there's no locking mechanism. Okay, so this is, you just have a bolt. Okay, and I'll take this apart for you guys. So you just have a bolt. And if you look at there's a weight back here, right? If you look back here, that's a weight. So the bolt is actually weighed. Right, you can see here it's actually weighed for extra weight to slow down that the bolt from coming back. And so because this doesn't rotate or lock or anything, what's happening is the face here just sits up again. When it goes forward, it just sits against the back of the barrel, basically. Okay, it does have, that's not, it doesn't have a gas key, but it does have this tombstone here, basically, so that you can, the charging handle can grip it and you can charge it. Get you back in there. So you can see how that goes in, and that just rests up against the back of the barrel. Okay, so what can happen here is every time you fire the gun, this comes back, right, because there's no gas system here. The pressure from the round being fired pushes this back. Okay, it ejects the empty case. Okay, then the recoil spring slams this forward, right, and then what happens is, as this goes forward, because there's no locking, what you can end up with is a bolt bounce, where this goes forward and it bounces back. Okay, and when you get that bolt bounce, that can create an out of battery discharge, right, where the next round ignites with the bolt slightly open. Okay, and it did happen to me a couple times before I went to the heavier 8 ounce buffer weights. Now, remember, I was shooting like 4,000 to 5,000 rounds a month. Okay, so out of 4,000 to 5,000 rounds a month, okay, it might have happened to me like 2 or 3 times, maybe 2 times in a whole year. Okay, so you gotta be doing a really high volume of shooting for this to happen to you. But when it does happen, man, the freaking gun sounds like a 308. Okay, because remember, that detonation is now happening like right here next to your face. It scares the shit out of you, and what happens is it blows the magazine out the bottom, right? Because that's where that that's where all that pressure is going to come out. That's the weakest point, the plastic magazine. So that's going to blow the magazine out the bottom. It's going to destroy the magazine. Usually the follower is like blown out. So it's not a big deal. It's happened to me probably at least 4 or 5 times over the course of like 2 years. It took me about a year before I realized. I found out that I needed, not even a year. It probably took me about 8 months before I found out that I needed a heavier buffer weight. Okay. Since I've did that, and it's going back all the way back to 2020, I've never had a problem with out of battery discharge. So that is the solution. Just get an 8-ounce buffer weight. Okay. So let's go back to the bolt. Okay. So like I said, with this, you gotta be careful that you don't. You need that extra heavy buffer weight so that you don't get these out of battery discharges. It's out of battery detonation. Okay, I keep saying discharge. It's out of battery detonation. That's the correct term. Hey, everyone, I want to cut in here for a second and show you guys the firing pin on the AR-9 bolt. Okay, so like I said, the whole thing is a bolt. There is no bolt carrier. So you got the cotter pin over here. So that's going to come out. And the firing pin is different, right, than an AR-15, right? And it also has a spring, right? So you got that spring there, and it's got a different head, right? So one of the things that you want to watch out for is these firing pin springs. They can break, right? They do break from time to time, and what can happen is if it breaks, you can end up with spring parts inside of the firing pin spring that will make the firing pin get stuck in the forward position. Okay, so this has happened to me. So it gets stuck in the forward position with the firing pin head sticking out, and what that's going to do is going to give you full auto fire. Okay, when that happens, until it gets unstuck or until the magazine empties out. So that's one of the things you want to be aware of, and you want to check periodically to make sure that your firing pin spring is good. And what I use, you got to get some like really skinny brushes like this to get it to basically go into that channel, and it's still a very tight fit. Unfortunately, because it's weight in the back, you can't go in from the back. You got to kind of twist it in there. You gotta get in there, and you got get in there, twist it, and clean it out. Okay, so that's one of the things you want to make sure that firing pin channel is clean and there's no debris in there. One of the things worth noting on the full auto machine pistols, right? The way they work this, the firing pin was not separate from the bolt. The firing pin was actually, it was actually just a little nipple that was on the bolt face. Right? It didn't move back and forth. It was just, it was just a little stud that stuck out. And what would happen is when you charge the gun, the bolt would sit in the rear position, right? So it was an open bolt, right? I think the Uzi was designed like that, but there's a few other guns. And then when you press the trigger, it releases it. It goes forward, right? It's going to come back. If you're holding down the trigger, there's nothing to stop it. So it's going to keep going back and forth until you release the trigger, which is going to stop the bolt in the rear position. Okay, so that's how an open bolt system works, right? And then the firing pin, there's no firing pin, right? Basically there's like a little pin head that's part of the bolt face itself. Okay, so yeah, let's put this guy back together. I'm just going to drop this in there. So yeah, I thought that'd be an additional piece of interesting information you guys should have. So push that forward. Then you take the cotter pin, put that in. Usually if you have any difficulty, you push down, okay? And that's gonna get the tail to go, if you push down on it, that's gonna get the tail to the cotter tail to lift up and go over the firing pin, okay? So, if you look over here, the extractor is a vulnerable area, right? Because again, this is there's 9mm ARs are very violent. So I do tend to go through extractors pretty frequently. Okay, again, with very high round counts. The extractor pin, right, the thing that holds the extractor in place, will also break. It took me a while to figure out what the right size roll pin is. Let me go look that up for you guys, and because that's important to know. Hold on, I'll be right back. Okay, the extractor roll pin. I wrote it here so I don't have to. I never lose it again because it took me a while to figure this out. It's a 9mm extractor pin. It's 3/32 by 5/8. Okay, 3/32 by 5/8. That's the length on it. Okay, and if you're getting this in metric, it's 0.250 by 0.875. Okay, so I got the metric there too for you too. 0.250 by 0.875. Okay, 3/32 by 5/8. I think I found like a whole pack or something on eBay that I bought. But yeah, for a while it was like I was having a hard time trying to find the right size of these roll pins that hold the extractor in place. Now, interesting thing here is that the if you break your extractor, okay, the gun will still shoot. Let me put this back together. With an AR-15, if you break your extractor, what's going to happen is that case is going to stay in the chamber. Okay, that's not the case. That's not the case with the AR-9, because remember, this is a direct blowback. Okay, it's a direct blowback. So when you fire the gun, the pressure is shoving that case back and moving the bolt back. Okay, so the case is actually pushing the bolt back. Okay, so the AR-9, being direct blowback, does not need an extractor to get it out. However, if your extractor breaks, it is a safety issue, because what's going to happen is you're firing the gun, right? Okay, and what you're going to do is you drop your magazine, and what happens if you go like this, right? And you don't look in there, because right now you can go like this. If the extractor is broken and if you got a round sitting in there, it's not going to pull it out. So that's why, especially with AR-9s, I always like visually check the chamber. If your extractor is broken and you need to get the case out, you have to point the gun up, and then it'll fall out. Okay, I know this from experience. It's happened to me a whole bunch of times. And the way, basically, the way I found out about this is probably the first, or second, or third time when this happened to me. Right? What I did is, okay, took the magazine out. Magazine's empty. Went like this. Okay, great. There's nothing in there. And as part of my check, what I'll do is after I check the chamber, I'll point the gun in the safe direction. I'll pull the trigger, and the gun went bang. Okay, and that's how I found out about this problem. Okay. So, that's why you follow your safety rules. Guns always point in the safe direction. So now what I'll do is when I want to check the AR-9, I'll open it up and I'll look in the chamber to make sure that the gun's not loaded. And then I'll point it down towards the ground, and I'll pull the trigger. And part of the reason why I pull the trigger is it's an extra verification that there's nothing in the chamber, and also it allows somebody that's like 20 feet away from me to see, because they're not looking in the chamber the way I'm looking in the chamber, but they can hear me, they can hear that click, and they know that the gun's not loaded. Okay, so that's why I'll check the chamber, and I'll point the gun in a safe direction and pull the trigger so that everybody can hear the click. Everybody knows the gun's not loaded. Okay, so I think that those are all the important things I want to share with you guys. One of the things I always do is I have found putting the ambidextrous safety on is very convenient. And what I do is I got the aerial precision ones, and what I do is I shave them down a little bit over here. I use the grinder. You can actually buy these pre-made like that, and they charge like $100. So I get the $30 ones. I'll put this in a vise. I'll put the safety switch in the vise. I'll grind it down, and this way you can have your finger straight here, and you can rotate this, and it's not hitting your finger. Okay, and then if I get a lefty, it's still enough meat there for the lefty to work that safety lever. Okay, so now the other thing with the AR-9s, I really like using the Holosun 510Cs, especially for training beginners, they got that big window, especially for training women. Because women will do like all sorts of weird stuff sometimes. Because remember, most guys, you know, from the time that they're kids, like when people are operating guns in a movie or something, right? They're paying attention, okay? Women don't pay attention to these things, or most women, okay? They don't pay. So if you give a woman a gun for the first time, despite the fact that they may have seen them in movies, you know what a lot of women will do? That's what they'll do. I'm not bullshitting you guys. That's what a lot of women will do that, okay? So using the big window optics, it is really easy for me. Like I'll get them. First of all, I always want to have an adjustable stock because with most women, and also a fairly short barrel, right? Because if you give them like a long 16-inch, it tends to be front heavy, right? And then what I'll do is I'll also shorten the stock a little bit to bring it, or the brace, whatever it is, to bring it closer to the body so it's less front heavy. And then I'll tell them to touch their face to the gun, right? And now even if they're a little further out like this, with the big window, right, they can see the circle, and that's a starting point, because once they see the circle, I'm like, okay, don't lose that circle, right? Because I'll have a circle dot on this big window. I'll say, don't lose that circle, okay? So I want you to do is just move this under your eye, okay? If they don't see that circle, what's going to happen is if I start adjusting them, then their head will go somewhere else. So it's really convenient for training beginners to have a big window optic so that they get on it, even if they're in some weird position like this. Like even in this weird position, I can see that circle, and I can tell somebody, okay, don't lose eye contact with that circle. Just slowly move the gun towards the center of your body. Okay, and that is a very big training aid for getting beginners to shoot guns. Okay, these AR-9s have been great for training women, and also the optics, right? Because I can tell you guys, before I started because when I started shooting, everything was iron sights. Okay, when I was training women, what would happen is, like 80% of the women would lose interest on guns, on shooting guns, when the guns only had iron sights. Okay, I mean that's just a fact of what it was, right? They just really weren't interested so much in this. They wanted to do the shooting, but they weren't too interested in lining up the sights so much. That's just something that, you know, it was just too much work for them. You know, like after a little while, like you know what, I'll just go over there and talk to my girlfriend or something, right? They would be like that. But once I put red dots, specifically circle dots on rifles, all of a sudden they would get on the gun, right? And they would be like this. This would be the expression. Again, ooh, I see it, I see it, I see it. That is a big difference. Okay, so once they saw that big circle dot, and I got them hitting, and they started shooting, hearing the ping, ping, ping on the steel targets, right? Now all of a sudden I got them hooked. Now all of a sudden I've got them hooked into the gun culture. Okay, so that's the starting point, right? Big red dot, okay, big circle dot, so that they can see, get on target, start hitting the target, start hearing the ping, 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 ping. Because now they're hooked into the gun culture, and then once they get good with that, and it's not gonna, you know, basically, like, it doesn't take much. It doesn't take much for anybody to be able to hit targets with a rifle, okay, with a big circle dot on it. Then I could transition them to the pistol, right, and start training them on that. And again, I had the same issue with pistols, right? Because initially I just had red dots on rifles, and the women mostly just wanted to shoot the rifles, right? I would put them on the pistols. You know what? They would try it. They're like, nah, I want to go back to the rifle, okay? So I had the same issue where maybe only 20% of the women were really interested in shooting pistols. They mostly wanted to shoot the rifles with the red dots, okay? But then when I started putting red dots on pistols, right? Specifically the ACSS, right? That has the big outer circle so that it guides into the center. Like all of a sudden, women were interested in shooting pistols too. Okay, so it makes a big difference. Red dots on rifles, red dots on pistols. Like all of a sudden, whereas before it's like I was like only 20% of the women were, you know, were interested to continue training with the pistols. Now all of a sudden I put a red dot on the pistol, and it's like I got 80 to 90%, 90+% of women are now interested in shooting pistols. So it's like 100% guaranteed. You know, I've got 15 years of doing this, right? I've seen it from when it was just iron sights to when it was just red dots on rifles to when it's red dots on both pistols and rifles. big difference with beginners, new shooters, women, right? And in order for us to grow the gun culture, we have to continually bring in new people, right? Because if we're not recruiting them to our side, right, if we're not recruiting them into the gun culture side, the anti-gunners are recruiting them, okay? So they're gonna go on one side or the other, okay? So we gotta get them on our side, and that's the reason why I became a gun instructor, so I can basically grow the gun culture, okay? So I want to share that with you guys on how these AR-9s work. These are great training guns. They're definitely not as accurate as AR-15s, right? They definitely don't have the distance. However, they are good training guns, right? And it also makes for cheap training, right? Because the 9mm is typically cheaper than the 5.56. Okay, so it's like I used to tell people that, like, when I had beginners, they would ask me what's like the first gun I should get, and I used to say, "Oh, get an AR-15." They would say, "Well, how about this AR-9 that you're training me on?" I'm like, "No, the AR-15 is a better gun." You know, I kind of changed my tune with that, because now I'm like, you know what? You like the AR-9, it's cheaper for you, you're going to train more with it. Get the AR-9, right? Fall in love with the guns, and then down the road we'll get an AR-15. Down the road we'll get a pistol too, right? So the AR-9s have become excellent training tools for growing the gun culture. So drop some comments. I'll talk to you all soon.